Chapter 23, Part 2, of The Pirate's Own Book. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Barry Eads. The Pirate's Own Book by Charles Ellms. Chapter 23, Part 2, of the West India Pirates. Monday, 21st. In the morning we walked round the beach, in expectation of finding something useful. On our way we picked up a paddle about 3 feet long, very similar to the Indian canoe paddle, except the handle, which was like that of a shovel, the top part being split off. We laid it by for the present. We likewise found some conchs and roasted them. They were pretty good shellfish, though rather tough. We discovered at low water a bar or spit of sand extending northeasterly from us, about 3 miles distant, to a cluster of keys, which were covered with mangrove trees, perhaps as high as our quince tree. My friend Mr. Brackett and George attempted to wade across, being at that time of tide only up to their armpits, but were pursued by a shark and returned without success. The tide rises about 4 feet. Tuesday, 22nd. We found several pieces of the palmetto or cabbage tree and some pieces of boards, put them together in the form of a raft, and endeavored to cross, but that proved ineffectual. Being disappointed, we sat down to reflect upon other means of relief, intending to do all in our power for safety while our strength continued. While sitting here, the sun was so powerful and oppressive, reflecting its rays upon the sea, which was then calm, and the white sand which dazzled the eye was so painful, that we retired under the awning. There the mosquitoes and flies were so numerous that good rest could not be found. We were, however, a little cheered, when, in scraping out the top of the ground to clear out, I may say, thousands of crickets and bugs, we found a hatchet, which was to us peculiarly serviceable. At night the strong northeasterly wind, which prevails there at all seasons, was so cold as to make it equally uncomfortable with the day. Thus, day after day, our sufferings and apprehensions multiplying, we were very generally alarmed. Thursday, 24th. This morning, after taking a little coffee, made of the water which we thought least salt, and 2 or 3 of the little cakes, we felt somewhat refreshed, and concluded to make another visit to those keys, in hopes of finding something more, which might make a raft for us to escape the pirates, and avoid perishing by thirst. Accordingly 7 of us set off, waded across the bar, and searched all the keys thereabouts. On one we found a number of sugar-box shooks, 2 lashing plank, and some pieces of old spars, which were a part of the Exertion's deck-load, that was thrown overboard when she grounded on the bar, spoken of in the first part of the narrative. It seems they had drifted 15 miles, and had accidentally lodged on these very keys within our reach. Had the pirates known this, they would undoubtedly have placed us in another direction. They no doubt thought that they could not place us on a worse place. The wind at this time was blowing so strong on shore as to prevent rafting our stuff round to our island, and we were obliged to hull it upon the beach for the present, then dug for water in the highest place, but found it as salt as ever, and then returned to our habitation. But hunger and thirst began to prey upon us, and our comforts were as few as our hopes. Friday, 25th. Again passed over to those keys to windward in order to raft our stuff to our island, it being most convenient for building. But the surf on the beach was so very rough, that we were again compelled to postpone it. Our courage, however, did not fail where there was the slightest hopes of life. Returning without it, we found on our way an old top-timber of some vessel. It had several spikes on it, which we afterwards found very serviceable. In the hollow of an old tree we found 2 garnas of small size, one male, the other female. Only one was caught. After taking off the skin, we judged it weighed 1.5 pounds. With some flour and lard, the only things we had except salt water, it made us a fine little mess. We thought it a rare dish, though a small one for 11 half-starved persons. At the same time a small vessel hove in sight. We made a signal to her with the blanket tied to a pole, and placed it on the highest tree. Some took off their white clothes, and waved them in the air, hoping they would come to us. Should they be pirates, they could do no more than kill us, and perhaps would give us some water, for which we began to suffer most excessively, but, notwithstanding all our efforts, she took no notice of us. Saturday, 26th. This day commenced with a moderate weather and smooth sea. At low tide found some cockles, boiled and ate them, but they were very painful to the stomach. David Warren had a fit of strangling, with swelling of the bowels, but soon recovered and said, something like salt rose in his throat and choked him. Most of us then set off for the Keys, where the plank and shooks were put together in a raft, which we with pieces of boards paddled over to our island. When we consulted the best plan, either to build a raft large enough for us all to go on, or a boat. But the shooks having 3 or 4 nails in each, and having a piece of large reed or bamboo previously found, of which we made pins, we concluded to make a boat. Sunday, 27. Commenced our labor, for which I know we need offer no apology. We took the 2 planks, which were about 14 feet long, and 2½ wide, and fixed them together for the bottom of the boat. Then the molds made of palmetto bark, cut timber and knees from mangrove trees, which spread so much as to make the boat 4 feet wide at the top, placed them exactly the distance apart of an Havana sugar box. Her stern was square and the bows tapered to a peak, making her form resemble a flat iron. We proceeded thus far and returned to rest for the night, but Mr. Brackett was too unwell to get much sleep. Monday, 28. Went on with the work as fast as possible. Some of the Spaniards had long knives about them, which proved very useful in fitting timbers, and a gimblet of mine, accidentally found on board the pirate, enabled us to use the wooden pins. And now our spirits began to revive, though water was continually in our minds. We now feared the pirates might possibly come, find out our plan, and put us to death, although before we had wished to see them, being so much in want of water. Our labor was extremely burdensome, and the Spaniards considerably peevish, but they would often say to me, never mind, captain, by and by, Americana or Spanyola catch them, me go and see 'em hung. We quitted work for the day, cooked some cakes, but found it necessary to reduce the quantity again, however small before. We found some herbs on a windward key, which the Spaniards called Spanish tea. This, when well boiled, we found somewhat palatable, although the water was very salt. This herb resembles pennyroyal in look and taste, though not so pungent. In the evening, when we were setting round the fire to keep off the mosquitoes, I observed David Warren's eyes shone like glass. The mate said to him, "David, I think you will die before morning. I think you are struck with death now." I thought so too, and told him, I thought it most likely we should all die here soon, but as some one of us might survive to carry the tidings to our friends, if you have any thing to say respecting your family, now is the time. He then said, I have a mother in Saco where I belong. She is a second time a widow. Tomorrow, if you can spare a scrap of paper and pencil, I will write something. But no tomorrow came to him. In the course of the night he had another spell of strangling, and soon after expired, without much pain and without a groan. He was about 26 years old. How solemn was this scene to us! Here we beheld the ravages of death commenced upon us. More than one of us considered death a happy release. For myself, I thought of my wife and children, and wished to live if God should so order it, though extreme thirst, hunger, and exhaustion had well nigh prostrated my fondest hopes. Tuesday, 29th. Part of us recommenced labor on the boat, while myself and Mr. Brackett went and selected the highest clear spot of sand on the northern side of the island, where we dug Warren's grave, and boxed it up with shooks, thinking it would be the most suitable spot for the rest of us, whose turn would come next, we knew not. At about 10 o'clock a.m. conveyed the corpse to the grave, followed by us survivors, a scene whose awful solemnity can never be painted. We stood around the grave, and there I read the funeral prayer from the Reverend Mr. Brooks's family prayer book, and committed the body to the earth, covered it with some pieces of board and sand, and returned to our labor. One of the Spaniards, an old man, named Manuel, who was partial to me, and I to him, made a cross and placed it at the head of the grave, saying, Jesus Christ hath him now. Although I did not believe in any mysterious influence of this cross, yet I was perfectly willing it should stand there. The middle part of the day being very warm, our mouths parched with thirst, and our spirits so depressed, that we made but little progress during the remainder of this day, but in the evening were employed in picking oakum out of the bolt rope taken from the old sail. Wednesday, 30th. Returned to labor on the boat with as much vigor as our weak and dilapidated state would admit. But it was a day of trial to us all, for the Spaniards and we Americans could not well understand each other's plans, and they being naturally petulant, would not work nor listen with any patience for Joseph, our English fellow prisoner, to explain our views. They would sometimes undo what they had done, and in a few minutes replace it again. However, before night we began to caulk her seams, by means of pieces of hard mangrove, made in form of a caulking iron, and had the satisfaction of seeing her in a form something like a boat. Thursday, 31st. Went on with the work, some at caulking, others at battening the seams with strips of canvas and pieces of pine nailed over, to keep the oakum in. Having found a suitable pole for a mast, the rest went about making a sail from the one we had used for a covering, also fitting oars of short pieces of boards in form of a paddle tied on a pole, we having a piece of fishing line brought by one of the prisoners. Thus, at 3 p.m., the boat was completed and put afloat. We had all this time confidently hoped that she would be sufficiently large and strong to carry us all. We made a trial and were disappointed. This was indeed a severe trial, and the emotions it called up were not easy to be suppressed. She proved leaky, for we had no carpenter's yard or smith's shop to go to, and now the question was, who should go, and how many? I found it necessary for 6, 4 to row, 1 to steer, and 1 to bail. 3 of the Spaniards and the Frenchman claimed the right, as being best acquainted with the nearest inhabitants. Likewise, they had when taken 2 boats left at St. Maria, about 40 miles distant, which they were confident of finding. They promised to return within 2 or 3 days for the rest of us. I thought it best to consent. Mr. Brackett, it was agreed, should go in my stead, because my papers must accompany me as a necessary protection, and my men apprehended danger if they were lost. Joseph Baxter, I think was his name, they wished should go, because he could speak both languages, leaving Manuel, George, Thomas, and myself to wait their return. Having thus made all arrangements, and putting up a keg of the least salt water, with a few pancakes of salt fish, they set off a little before sunset, with our best wishes and prayers for their safety, and returned to our relief. To launch off into the wide ocean, with strength almost exhausted, and in such a frail boat as this, you will say was very hazardous, and in truth it was, but what else was left to us? Their intention was to touch at the key where the Exertion was, and if no boat was to be found there, to proceed to St. Maria, and if none there, to go to Trinidad and send us relief. But alas! It was the last time I ever saw them. Our suffering this day was most acute. Tuesday, 5th. About 10 o'clock a.m. discovered a boat drifting by on the southeastern side of the island about a mile distant. I deemed it a providential thing to us, and urged Thomas and George trying the raft for her. They reluctantly consented and set off, but it was nearly 3 p.m. when they came up with her. It was the same boat we had built. Where then was my friend Brackett and those who went with him? Every appearance was unfavorable. I hoped that a good providence had yet preserved him. The 2 men who went for the boat found it full of water, without oars, paddle, or sail. Being in this condition, and about 3 miles to the leeward, the men found it impossible to tow her up, so left her, and were about 11 o'clock at night getting back with the raft. They were so exhausted that had it not been nearly calm, they could never have returned. Wednesday, 6th. This morning was indeed the most gloomy I had ever experienced. There appeared hardly a ray of hope that my friend Brackett could return, seeing the boat was lost. Our provisions nearly gone, our mouths parched extremely with thirst, our strength wasted, our spirits broken, and our hopes imprisoned within the circumference of this desolate island in the midst of an unfrequented ocean, all these things gave to the scene around us the hue of death. In the midst of this dreadful despondence, a sail hove in sight bearing the white flag. Our hopes were raised, of course, but no sooner raised than darkened by hearing a gun fired. Here then was another gang of pirates. She soon, however, came near enough to anchor, and her boat pushed off towards us with 3 men in her. Thinking it now no worse to die by sword than famine, I walked down immediately to meet them. I knew them not. A moment before the boat touched the ground, a man leaped from her bows, and caught me in his arms. It was Nickola, saying, "Do you now believe Nickola is your friend?" "Yes," said he, Jemison will yet prove himself so. No words can express my emotions at this moment. This was a friend indeed. The reason of my not recognizing them before was that they had cut their beards and whiskers. Turning to my fellow sufferers, Nickola asked, "Are these all that are left of you? Where are the others?" At this moment, seeing David's grave, "Are they dead, then? Ah! I suspected it. I know what you were put here for." As soon as I could recover myself, I gave him an account of Mr. Bracket and the others. "How unfortunate," he said. "They must be lost, or some pirates have taken them. But," he continued, "we have no time to lose. You had better embark immediately with us, and go where you please. We are at your service." The other two in the boat were Frenchmen, one named Lion, the other Paroquet. They affectionately embraced each of us, then holding to my mouth the nose of a tea kettle, filled with wine, said, "Drink plenty, no hurt you." I drank as much as I judged prudent. They then gave it to my fellow sufferers. I experienced almost immediate relief, not feeling it in my head. They had also brought in the boat for us a dish of salt beef and potatoes, of which we took a little; then sent the boat on board for the other two men, being 5 in all, who came ashore, and rejoiced enough was I to see among them Thomas Young, one of my crew, who was detained on board the Mexican, but had escaped through Nickola's means; the other a Frenchman, named John Cadete. I now thought again and again, with troubled emotion, of my dear friend Bracket's fate. I took the last piece of paper I had, and wrote with a pencil a few words, informing him, should he come there, that I and the rest were safe, that I was not mistaken in the friend in whom I had placed so much confidence, that he had accomplished my highest expectations, and that I should go immediately to Trinidad, and requested him to go there also, and apply to Mr. Isaac W. Lord, my consignee, for assistance. I put the paper into a junk bottle, previously found on the beach, put in a stopper, and left it, together with what little flour remained, a keg of water brought from Nickola's vessel, and a few other things which I thought might be of service to him. We then repaired with our friends on board, where we were kindly treated. She was a sloop from Jamaica, of about 12 tons, with a cargo of rum and wine, bound to Trinidad. I asked which way they intended to go. They said, to Jamaica if agreeable to me. As I preferred Trinidad, I told them, if they would give me the Exertion's boat which was alongside, beside their own, some water and provisions, we would take chance in her. For perhaps, said I, you will fare better at Jamaica than at Trinidad. After a few minutes' consultation, they said, you are too much exhausted to row the distance of 100 miles, therefore we will go and carry you. We consider ourselves at your service. I expressed a wish to take a look at the Exertion. Possibly we might hear something of Mr. Bracket. Nickola said very well, so got under way and run for her, having a light westerly wind. He then related to me the manner of their desertion from the pirates. As nearly as I can recollect his own words, he said, a few days since the pirates took 4 small vessels, I believe Spaniards. They having but 2 officers for the 2 first, the third fell to me as prize master, and having an understanding with the 3 Frenchmen and Thomas, selected them for my crew, and went on board with orders to follow the Mexican, which I obeyed. The 4th, the pirates took out all but 1 man, and bade him also follow their vessel. Now our schooner leaked so bad, that we left her and in her stead agreed to take this little sloop, which we are now in, together with the 1 man. The night being very dark, we all agreed to desert the pirates, altered our course, and touched at St. Maria, where we landed the 1 man, saw no boats there, could hear nothing from you, and agreed one and all, at the risk of our lives, to come and liberate you if you were alive, knowing as we did that you were put on this key to perish. On our way we boarded the Exertion, thinking possibly you might have been there. On board her we found a sail and paddle. We took one of the pirates' boats which they had left alongside of her, which proves how we came by 2 boats. My friend, the circumstance I am now about to relate will somewhat astonish you. When the pirates' boat with Bolivar was sent to the before mentioned key, on the 19th of January, it was their intention to leave you prisoners there, where was nothing but salt water and mangroves, and no possibility of escape. This was the plan of Baltazar, their abandoned pilot. But Bolivar's heart failed him, and he objected to it. Then, after a conference, Captain Jonnia ordered you to be put on the little island from whence we have now taken you. But after this was done, That night the French and Portuguese part of the Mexican's crew protested against it, so that Captain Jonnia, to satisfy them, sent his large boat to take you and your fellow prisoners back again, taking care to select his confidential Spaniards for this errand. And you will believe me, they set off from the Mexican, and after spending about as much time as would really have taken them to come to you, they returned, and reported they had been to your island, and landed, and that none of you were there, somebody having taken you off. This all my companions here know to be true. I knew it was impossible you could have been liberated, and therefore we determined among ourselves that should an opportunity occur, we would come and save your lives, as we now have. He then expressed, as he hitherto had done, and I believe with sincerity, his disgust with the bad company which he had been in, and looked forward with anxiety to the day when he might return to his native country. I advised him to get on board an American vessel, whenever an opportunity offered, and come to the United States, and on his arrival direct a letter to me, repeating my earnest desire to make some return for the disinterested friendship which he had shown toward me. With the Frenchman I had but little conversation, being unacquainted with the language. Here ended Nicola's account. And now, said the Frenchman, our hearts be easy. Nicola observed he had left all, and found us. I gave them my warmest tribute of gratitude, saying I looked upon them under God as the preservers of our lives, and promised them all the assistance which my situation might enable me to afford. This brings me to Thursday evening, 7th. When at 11 o'clock we anchored at the creek's mouth near the Exertion. I was anxious to board her, accordingly took with me Nicola, Thomas, George, and 2 others, well armed, each with a musket and cutlass. I jumped on her deck, saw a fire in the camboose, but no person there. I called aloud Mr. Brackett's name several times, saying, "It is Captain Lincoln, don't be afraid, but show yourself," but no answer was given. She had no masts, spars, rigging, furniture, provisions, or anything left, except her bowsprit, and a few barrels of salt provisions of her cargo. Her ceiling had holes cut in it, no doubt in their foolish search for money. I left her with peculiar emotions, such as I hope never again to experience, and returned to the little sloop, where we remained till Friday 8th, when I had disposition to visit the island on which we were first imprisoned. Found nothing there, saw a boat among the mangroves, near the Exertion. Returned and got under way immediately for Trinidad. In the night, while under full sail, run aground on a sunken quay, having rocks above the water, resembling old stumps of trees. We, however, soon got off and anchored. Most of those quays have similar rocks about them, which navigators must carefully guard against. Monday, 11th. Got under way. Saw a brig at anchor about 5 miles below the mouth of the harbor. We hoped to avoid her speaking us, but when we opened in sight of her, discovered a boat making towards us, with a number of armed men in her. This alarmed my friends, as we did not see the brig's ensign hoisted. They declared the boat was a pirate, and looking through the spy glass, they knew some of them to be the Mexican's men. This state of things was quite alarming. They said, "We will not be taken alive by them." Immediately the boat fired a musket. The ball passed through our mainsail. My friends insisted on beating them off. I endeavored to dissuade them, believing, as I did, that the brig was a Spanish man of war, who had sent her boat to ascertain who we were. I thought we had better heave to. Immediately another shot came. Then they insisted on fighting, and said, if I would not help them, I was no friend. I reluctantly acquiesced, and handed up the guns, commenced firing upon them, and they upon us. We received several shot through the sails, but no one was hurt on either side. Our boats had been cast adrift to make us go the faster, and we gained upon them, continued firing until they turned from us, and went for our boats, which they took in tow for the brig. Soon after this it became calm. Then I saw the brig had us in her power. She manned and armed 2 more boats for us. We now concluded, since we had scarcely any ammunition, to surrender, and were towed down alongside the brig on board, and were asked by the captain, who could speak English, what for you fire on the boat? I told him we thought her a pirate, and did not like to be taken by them again, having already suffered too much, showing my papers. He said, Captain Americana, never mind, go and take some dinner. Which are your men? I pointed them out to him, and he ordered them the liberty of the decks, but my friend Nicola and his 3 associates were immediately put in irons. They were, however, afterwards taken out of irons and examined, and I understood the Frenchmen agreed to enlist, as they judged it the surest way to better their condition. Whether Nickola enlisted I do not know, but think that he did, as I understood that offer was made to him. I however endeavoured to explain more distinctly to the captain the benevolent efforts of these 4 men by whom my life had been saved, and used every argument in my power to procure their discharge. I also applied to the governor, and exerted myself with peculiar interest, dictated as I trust with heartfelt gratitude, and I ardently hope ere this, that Nickola is on his way to this country, where I may have an opportunity of convincing him that such an act of benevolence will not go unrewarded. Previous to my leaving Trinidad, I made all the arrangements in my power with my influential friends, and doubt not that their laudable efforts will be accomplished. The sloop's cargo was then taken on board the brig, after which the captain requested a certificate that I was politely treated by him, saying that his name was Captain Candame, of the privateer brig Prudente of 18 guns. This request I complied with. His first lieutenant told me he sailed out of Boston, as commander for T.C. Armory, Esquire, during the last war. In the course of the evening my friends were taken out of irons, and examined separately, then put back again. The captain invited me to supper in his cabin, and a berth for the night, which was truly acceptable. The next morning after breakfast, I with my people were set on shore with the few things we had, with the promise of the Exertion's small boat in a day or 2, but it was never sent me. The reason, let the reader imagine. On landing at the wharf Castledar, we were immediately taken by soldiers to the guard house, which was a very filthy place, thinking, I suppose, and even calling us, pirates. Soon some friends came to see me. Mr. Cotton, who resides there, brought us in some soup. Mr. Isaac W. Lord, of Boston, my merchant, came with Captain Tate, who sent immediately to the governor, for I would not show my papers to any one else. He came about sunset, and after examining Manuel, my Spanish fellow prisoner, and my papers, said to me, giving me the papers, "Captain, you are at liberty." I was kindly invited by Captain Matthew Rice, of schooner Galaxy, of Boston, to go on board his vessel, and live with him during my stay there. This generous offer I accepted, and was treated by him with the greatest hospitality, for I was hungered and he gave me meat, I was athirst and he gave me drink, I was naked and he clothed me, a stranger and he took me in. He likewise took Manuel and my 3 men for that night. Next day Mr. Lord rendered me all necessary assistance in making my protest. He had heard nothing from me until my arrival. I was greatly disappointed in not finding Mr. Brackett, and requested Mr. Lord to give him all needful aid if he should come there. To Captain Carnes, of the schooner Hannah, of Boston, I would tender my sincere thanks, for his kindness in giving me a passage to Boston, which I gladly accepted. To those gentlemen of Trinidad, and many captains of American vessels, who gave me sea clothing, etc., I offer my cordial gratitude. I am fully of the opinion that these ferocious pilots are linked in with many inhabitants of Cuba, and the government in many respects appears covertly to encourage them. It is with heartfelt delight that since the above narrative was written, I have learnt that Mr. Brackett and his companions are safe. He arrived at Port de Esprit, about 40 leagues east of Trinidad. A letter has been received from him, stating that he should proceed to Trinidad the first opportunity. It appears that after reaching the wreck, they found a boat from the shore, taking on board some of the Exertion's cargo, in which they proceeded to the above place. Why it was not in his power to come to our relief will no doubt be satisfactorily disclosed when he may be so fortunate as once more to return to his native country and friends. I felt great anxiety to learn what became of Jameson, who, my readers will recollect, was detained on board the Spanish brig Prudente near Trinidad. I heard nothing from him until I believe 18 months after I reached home, when I received a letter from him from Montego Bay, Jamaica, informing me that he was then residing in that island. I immediately wrote to him and invited him to come to the United States. He accordingly came on passenger with Captain Wilson of Cohosat, and arrived in Boston in August 1824. Our meeting was very affecting. Trying scenes were brought up before us, scenes gone for ever, through which we had passed together, where our acquaintance was formed, and since which time we had never met. I beheld once more the preserver of my life, the instrument, under Providence, of restoring me to my home, my family, and my friends, and I regarded him with no ordinary emotion. My family were delighted to see him, and cordially united in giving him a warm reception. He told me that after we separated in Trinidad, he remained on board the Spanish brig. The commander asked him and his companions if they would enlist. The Frenchmen replied that they would, but he said nothing, being determined to make his escape the very first opportunity which should present. The Spanish brig afterwards fell in with a Colombian Patriot, an armed brig of 18 guns. Being of about equal force, they gave battle, and fought between 3 and 4 hours. Both parties were very much injured, and, without any considerable advantage on either side, both drew off to make repairs. The Spanish brig Prudente put into St. Jago de Cuba. Jameson was wounded in the action, by a musket ball, through his arm, and was taken on shore, with the other wounded, and placed in the hospital of St. Jago. Here he remained for a considerable time, until he had nearly recovered, when he found an opportunity of escaping, and embarking for Jamaica. He arrived in safety at Kingston, and from there, travelled barefoot over the mountains, until very much exhausted he reached Montego Bay, where he had friends, and where one of his brothers possessed some property. From this place he afterwards wrote to me. He told me that before he came to Massachusetts, he saw the villainous pilot of the Mexican, the infamous Baltazar, with several other pirates, brought into Montego Bay, from whence they were to be conveyed to Kingston to be executed. Whether the others were part of the Mexican's crew or not I do not know. Baltazar was an old man, and as Jameson said, it was a melancholy and heart-rendering sight, to see him borne to execution with those grey hairs, which might have been venerable in virtuous old age, now a shame and reproach to this hoary villain, for he was full of years, and old in iniquity. When Jameson received the letter which I wrote him, he immediately embarked with Captain Wilson, and came to Boston, as I have before observed. According to his own account, he was of a very respectable family in Greenock, Scotland. His father, when living, was a rich cloth merchant, but both his father and mother had been dead many years. He was the youngest of 13 children, and being, as he said, of a roving disposition, had always followed the seas. He had received a polite education, and was of a very gentlemanly deportment. He spoke several living languages, and was skilled in drawing and painting. He had travelled extensively in different countries, and acquired in consequence an excellent knowledge of their manners and customs. His varied information, for hardly any subject escaped him, rendered him a very entertaining companion. His observations on the character of different nations were very liberal, marking their various traits, their virtues and vices, with playful humorousness, quite free from bigotry or narrow prejudice. I was in trade between Boston and Philadelphia at the time he came to Massachusetts, and he sailed with me several trips as my mate. He afterwards went to Cuba, and was subsequently engaged in the mackerel fishery out of the port of Hingham during the warm season, and in the winter frequently employed himself in teaching navigation to young men, for which he was eminently qualified. He remained with us until his death, which took place in 1829. At this time he had been out at sea 2 or 3 days, when he was taken sick, and was carried into Cape Cod, where he died on the 1st day of May, 1829, and there his remains lie buried. Peace be to his ashes. They rest in a strange land, far from his kindred and his native country. Since his death I have met with Mr. Stewart of Philadelphia, who was commercial agent in Trinidad at the time of my capture. He informed me that the piratical schooner Mexican was afterwards chased by an English government vessel from Jamaica, which was cruising in search of it. Being hotly pursued, the pirates deserted their vessel, and fled to the mangrove bushes, on an island similar to that on which they had placed me and my crew to die. The English surrounded them, and thus they were cut off from all hopes of escape. They remained there, I think, 14 days, when being almost entirely subdued by famine, 11 surrendered themselves and were taken. The others probably perished among the mangroves. The few who were taken were carried by the government vessel into Trinidad. Mr. Stewart said that he saw them himself, and such miserable objects that had life he never before beheld. They were in a state of starvation, their beards had grown to a frightful length, Their bodies were covered with filth and vermin, and their countenances were hideous. From Trinidad they were taken to Kingston, Jamaica, and there hung on Friday, the 7th of February, 1823. About a quarter of an hour before day dawn, the wretched culprits were taken from the jail, under a guard of soldiers from the 50th Regiment and the City Guard. On their arrival at the Wherry Wharf, the military retired, and the prisoners, with the town guard, were put on board 2 wherries, in which they proceeded to Port Royal Point, the usual place of execution in similar cases. They were there met by a strong party of military, consisting of 50 men, under command of an officer. They formed themselves into a square round the place of execution, where the sheriff and his officers, with the prisoners in the centre. The gallows was of considerable length, and contrived with a drop so as to prevent the unpleasant circumstances which frequently occur. The unfortunate men had been in continual prayer from the time they were awakened out of a deep sleep till they arrived at that place, where they were to close their existence. They all expressed their gratitude for the attention they had met with from the sheriff and the inferior officers. Many pressed the hands of the turnkey to their lips, others to their hearts, and on their knees prayed that God, Jesus Christ, and the Virgin Mary would bless him and the other jailers for their goodness. They all then fervently joined in prayer. To the astonishment of all, no clerical character of any persuasion was present. They repeatedly called out, "Adonde este el Padre?" Where is the Holy Father? Juan Hernandez called on all persons present to hear him. He was innocent. What they had said about his confessing himself guilty was untrue. He had admitted himself guilty because he hoped for pardon, but that now he was to die, he called God, Jesus Christ, the Holy Ghost, the Virgin Mary, and the saints to witness that he spoke the truth, that he was no pirate, no murderer, he had been forced. The lieutenant of the pirates was a wretch, who did not fear God, and had compelled him to act. Juan Gutierrez and Francisco de Sayas were loud in their protestations of innocence. Manuel Lima said for himself he did not care. He felt for the old man, Miguel Jose. How could he be a pirate who could not help himself? If it were a Christian country, they would have pardoned him for his gray hairs. He was innocent. They had both been forced. Let none of his friends or relations ever venture to sea. He hoped his death would be a warning to them, that the innocent might suffer for the guilty. The language of this young man marked him a superior to the generality of his companions in misfortune. The seaman of the Whim stated that he was very kind to them when prisoners on board the piratical vessel. Just before he was turned off, he addressed the old man. "Adios, viejo, para siempre adios." Farewell, old man, forever farewell. Several of the prisoners cried out for mercy, pardon, pardon. Domingo Ucala, the black man, then addressed them. "Do not look for mercy here, but pray to God. We are all brought here to die. This is not built for nothing. Here we must end our lives. You know I am innocent, but I must die the same as you all. There is not anybody here who can do us any good, so let us think only of God Almighty. We are not children, but men. We know that all must die, and in a few years those who kill us must die too. When I was born, God set the way of my death. I do not blame anybody. I was taken by the pirates, and they made me help them. They would not let me be idle. I could not show that this was the truth, and therefore they have judged me by the people they have found me with. I am put to death unjustly, but I blame nobody. It was my misfortune. Come, let us pray. If we are innocent, so much the less we have to repent. I do not come here to accuse anyone. Death must come one day or other, better to the innocent than guilty." He then joined in prayer with the others. He seemed to be much reverenced by his fellow prisoners. He chose those prayers he thought most adapted to the occasion. Hundreds were witnesses to the manly firmness of this negro. Observing a bystander listening attentively to the complaints of one of his fellow wretches, he translated what had been said into English. With a steady pace and a resolute and resigned countenance, he ascended the fatal scaffold. Observing the executioner unable to untie a knot on the collar of one of the prisoners, he with his teeth untied it. He then prayed most fervently till the drop fell. Miguel Jose protested his innocence. "No he robado, no he matado ninguén, muro inocente." I have robbed no one, I have killed no one, I die innocent. I am an old man, but my family will feel my disgraceful death." Francisco Magul prayed devoutly, but inaudibly. His soul seemed to have quitted the body before he was executed. Prete Gullimillit called on all to witness his innocence. It was of no use for him to say an untruth, for he was going before the face of God. Augustus Hernandez repeatedly declared his innocence, requested that no one would say he had made a confession. He had none to make. Juan Hernandez was rather obstinate when the execution pulled the cap over his eyes. He said rather passionately, "Quita este mis ojos," remove it from my eyes. He then rubbed it up against one of the posts of the gallows. Miguel Jose made the same complaint, and drew the covering from his eyes by rubbing his head against a fellow sufferer. Pedro Nandre was loud in his ejaculations for mercy. He wept bitterly. He was covered with marks of deep wounds. The whole of the 10 included in the death warrant having been placed on the scaffold, and the rope suspended, the drop was let down. Nandre, being an immense heavy man, broke the rope and fell to the ground alive. Juan Hernandez struggled long. Lima was much convulsed. The old man, Gullimillit, and Magul were apparently dead before the drop fell. Eucalla, the black man, gave one convulsion, and all was over. When Nandre recovered from the fall, and saw his 9 lifeless companions stretched in death, he gave an agonizing shriek. He wrung his hands, screamed, "Favor, favor, me mata sin cosa. Oh, buenos Cristianos, me amparen, ampara me, no he Cristiano en esta tierra? Mercy, mercy, they kill me without cause. Oh, good Christians, protect me, oh, protect me. Is there no Christian in this land?" He then lifted his eyes to heaven and prayed long and loud. Upon being again suspended, he was for a long period convulsed. He was an immense powerful man, and died hard. A piratical station was taken in the island of Cuba by the U.S. schooners of war Greyhound and Beagle. They left Thompson's Island June 7, 1823, under the command of Lieutenants Kearney and Newton, and cruised within the Keys on the south side of Cuba, as far as Cape Cruz, touching at all the intermediate ports on the island to intercept pirates. On the 21st of July they came to anchor off Cape Cruz, and Lieutenant Kearney went in his boat to reconnoitre the shore, when he was fired on by a party of pirates who were concealed among the bushes. A fire was also opened from several pieces of cannon erected on a hill a short distance off. The boat returned, and 5 or 6 others were manned from the vessels, and pushed off for the shore, but a very heavy cannonade being kept up by the pirates on the heights, as well as from the boats, were compelled to retreat. The 2 schooners were then warped in, when they discharged several broadsides, and covered the landing of the boats. After a short time the pirates retreated to a hill that was well fortified. A small hamlet in which the pirates resided was set fire to and destroyed. 3 guns, 1 a 4-pounder, and 2 large swivels, with several pistols, cutlasses, and 8 large boats, were captured. A cave about 150 feet deep was discovered near where the houses were, and after considerable difficulty a party of seamen got to the bottom, where was found an immense quantity of plunder, consisting of broadcloths, dry goods, female dresses, saddlery, etc. Many human bones were also in the cave, supposed to have been unfortunate persons who were taken and put to death. A great many of the articles were brought away, and the rest destroyed. About 40 pirates escaped to the heights, but many were supposed to have been killed from the fire of the schooners, as well as from the men who landed. The bushes were so thick that it was impossible to go after them. Several other caves are in the neighborhood, in which it was conjectured they occasionally take shelter. In 1823 Commodore Porter commanded the United States squadron in these seas. Much good was done in preventing new acts of piracy, but these wretches kept aloof and did not venture to sea as formerly, but some were taken. Almost every day furnished accounts evincing the activity of Commodore Porter and the officers and men under his command, but for a long time their industry and zeal was rather shown in the suppression of piracy than the punishment of it. At length, however, an opportunity offered for inflicting the latter, as detailed in the following letter, dated Matanzas, July 10, 1823. I have the pleasure of informing you of a brilliant achievement attained against the pirates on the 5th instant by 2 barges attached to Commodore Porter's squadron, the Gallinipper, Lieutenant Watson, 18 men, and the Mosquito, Lieutenant Inman, 10 men. The barges were returning from a cruise to windward, when they were near Jaguapa Bay, 13 leagues to windward of Matanzas. They entered it, it being a rendezvous for pirates. They immediately discovered a large schooner under way, which they supposed to be a patriot privateer, and as their stores were nearly exhausted, they hoped to obtain some supplies from her. They therefore made sail in pursuit. When they were within cannon shot distance, she rounded to and fired her long gun, at the same time run up the bloody flag, directing her course towards the shore, and continuing to fire without effect. When she had got within a short distance of the shore, she came to, with springs on her cable, continuing to fire, and when the barges were within 30 yards, they fired their muskets without touching boat or man. Our men gave 3 cheers, and prepared to board. The pirates, discovering their intention, jumped into the water, when the bargemen, calling on the name of Allen, commenced a destructive slaughter, killing them in the water and as they landed. So exasperated were our men that it was impossible for their officers to restrain them, and many were killed after orders were given to grant quarter. 27 dead were counted, some sunk, 5 taken prisoners by the bargemen, and 8 taken by a party of Spaniards on shore. The officers calculated that from 30 to 35 were killed. The schooner mounted a long 9-pounder on a pivot, and 4 4-pounders, with every other necessary armament, and a crew of 50 to 60 men, and ought to have blown the barges to atoms. She was commanded by the notorious Diablito, or Little Devil. This statement I have from Lieutenant Watson himself, and it is certainly the most decisive operation that has been effected against those murderers, either by the English or American force. This affair occurred on the same spot where the brave Allen fell about 1 year since. The prize was sent to Thompson's Island. A British sloop of war, about the same time, captured a pirate schooner off St. Domingo, with a crew of 60 men. She had $200,000 in specie, and other valuable articles on board. The brig Vestal sent another pirate schooner to New Providence. End of chapter 23, part 2.